Radio Split Ranch.
Hello and welcome once again to Radio Split Ranch, a monthly visit with the Capital Region's great broadcasters of the past and sometimes present. I'm Warren Garling when I'm not on the radio. I've got another eye-opening conversation to share with you this month with a veteran broadcaster who spent most of his career on the radio in Saratoga County. But that's not the most interesting part of his story. This seasoned pro says radio wasn't his first choice for a career. He was never really bitten by the radio bug when he was young, as many of our previous guests were. And being a personality, per se, is not his favorite announcing gig. I'll let the man himself explain. Enjoy my conversation with John Meaney. I haven't known this guy too long, but I know him well enough to know that he's bitten as bad by this radio bug as most everybody I've interviewed so far. John Meaney, thank you for coming to the Radio Split Ranch.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
No, having met you, only maybe 3-4 years ago, maybe? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not knowing much about your background. And you know what? I haven't done a lot of research either, so I'm going to learn about you at the same time that everybody else listening does.
No, preparing for this, I learned a lot about me. Wow, I really did that sometime in my life.
Exactly. Well, we want to hear the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and just have some fun along the way, because I know you enjoy this business as much as every other crazy person that's sat where you're sitting. Yeah. Right. So where did it bite you? How old were you?
You know, that's kind of funny because I'm not your typical radio announcer.
First
of all,
that.
The bug did not bite me.
Okay.
Until much later in life. I was not one of those who, practiced with a mic or wanted to be on the radio like in my youth or in my teens.
Okay. Interesting.
My first introduction to radio was actually when I went to college.
Okay.
I went to Ithaca College, great broadcast
very
school.
Nice. I have a great niece there right now. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
She's a bomber, huh?
Evidently.
I don't know if we want to say that these days, but we're proud. And I was going there to be a television director. I did have that bug.
Oh, interesting.
My fascination are buttons, lights, and switches. And,
that's what radio was for me. I was 11 years old and I said, can you imagine playing with all this equipment? Yeah.
On top of that, I'm a little bit late when it comes to the Star Trek era. So those type of lights and switches didn't turn me on as much.
Okay.
But I was. And I television, I had a little chance to do it in high school with doing camera work, and we would tape the basketball games or the football games. And that's all I was doing.
Now, where was that? Where
at Saratoga Springs High School.
So are you a local boy?
I'm a Blue Streak, and I stayed there.
Wow. Yeah. You're still there.
My only other place I ever lived was Ithaca, New York during those 4 years.
How about that?
I don't know why, but it just...
there's nothing wrong with it.
I mean, my whole family, I have 4 siblings, and my mom and dad at the time, all moved away. So
interesting. Isn't that crazy?
But I stayed home. So when I got into college, my very first class was, okay, let's learn or teach you how to use the radio board and be on the radio. And of course, I had my switches and knobs and old LPB board and things like that. And I just this is really nice. I like this.
Cool, yeah.
What I didn't realize was anything about my voice. Except for one thing. I did have a fascination with my voice when it came to public address announcing. And I'll mention that a little bit on the side because that is really actually what I consider my forte. And I'll tell you how in that. But so I had a little work with my voice, but I never thought that television or radio that I would ever be in front of a microphone.
Interesting.
I didn't think it was my
so you were going to be behind the scene.
Absolutely. Yeah. And plus, the old, couldn't be television because of this face, at least what I thought.
Yeah. I always tell people my mother told me I had the perfect face for radio. It's just a great line,
It's what we have, and that's what we are. So anyway, I enjoyed it. And of course, you do things in school. And the great thing about Ithaca, you start in your freshman year. And I was reading news, or maybe I did a disc jockey shift for 3 hours once a week or something like that. But I didn't really have the bug, Actually, I got into television, got in right away, a production assistant for our football broadcast, and got into directing. I was a great cameraman. I really was a good cameraman.
Nice.
So people would use me, and in my sophomore year, the end of my sophomore year, I was told to be the I was given the job as the operations manager of the TV station.
Nice.
At Ithaca.
Very
so
nice.
I really moved up the ladder.
Yeah.
However, I was not the best student. And so I coasted. I did okay.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't, I wasn't failing or anything, but they had certain requirements. And in my sophomore year at finals week, I got strep throat and did not do well during finals week. I passed everything, but I was down to, I don't know, just below the 2.5 for overall, and I needed to have a 3.0. Yeah. So the TV station said, why don't you work on your grades?
Wow.
And I said, okay, I'll do that.
Now, did you find that it was mostly the non-communications classes that you're having the struggles with? That's what happened to me.
Just before we went on mic, I told you I wasn't much of a reader.
That's right.
I was a great, listener and things like that, but I also wasn't a good writer.
Okay.
I became a better writer later on. As a matter of fact, the best class I ever took in college was in my senior year, and it was freshman writing. But I learned how to write.
Yeah,
and that was a big thing for me.
Sure.
So I guess they call it academic probation, but I wasn't in trouble way down there with a failing class or anything. So radio didn't know that I had this little probation.
Okay.
So I went over to radio, and they had two stations. They have this wonderful album-oriented rock station that, is actually well known in the college community for being a good radio station in Ithaca.
Nice. What were the calls there?
WICB.
Okay.
Ithaca College Broadcast.
Perfect.
And 92, I'm going to forget that one.
Too many years ago.
But it's somewhere around 92. But we also had a carrier current station.
Yep.
And that's a 106 VIC. And that was more of a contemporary hit, station. That's where I all of a sudden started to excel.
Cool.
I started doing the show, getting enthusiastic about it. I had people around me that were, really good and taught me how to be good on the radio, so much so that I was the person. I even hosted a top 40 countdown.
Okay.
That we had a producer that did it, board operator, and my co-host is a woman by the name, or student by the name of Janet Snyder.
Okay.
And she's really big in Buffalo, by the way. You could look her up right now.
Yeah.
She does pretty well, but it was the two of us, and, we did all the remote broadcasts and everything. And I was given a certificate at the end of my senior years at Best On Air. So I caught the bug. So I had it at least, but I still wanted to go into television.
Okay.
So I got through, college, had, a very nice career, and radio was a part of it, but I still was not looking to go into radio.
Okay.
Let me give you two other things that I forgot to mention.
Okay.
And this is the first important one. It was actually after my freshman year in 1982. Yes, I'm that young to some of the group that my father opened up a restaurant with a partner in Saratoga Springs, and the Rotary would meet there. And a member of that Rotary was a guy by the name of Mark Karras.
Okay.
Do you remember that name?
I'm afraid I don't.
He was actually the news director for WGY.
Okay.
And,
I'd forgotten that.
Because he talked with, and he played a very important role, and unfortunately he has passed. Passed very young. I think he was only 55 or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But he talked with my dad and got me an internship at WGY.
Nice.
But I had a daytime job. So important. I was delivering produce for
well, there you go.
10 hours a day or something like that, get myself filthy. And then I would clean up and head down to Balltown Road.
Yeah.
And it was at the time where Channel 6 and WGY shared the newsroom.
Same building.
So I got to meet so many of the people I loved growing up with. And at the time, it was like almost everybody, Ernie Tatro, Ed Digg, and Liz Bishop, all working together. And then there were some others. Yaf Lombardo was doing the sports. Remember him?
Yes. His name has not been mentioned yet. You're the first one to mention him.
And Tim Welch was doing the other. But we were over the GY desk, and I got to work with, I'll mention the first name of the person that I just love in this business, and he was my mentor, and to this day one of my idols, and he has one of the most marvelous voices, and that's Peter Reef.
Oh yeah.
I work with him about 2 nights a week. I would go down there and do that, and at the same time I got to also meet some others, because it was my job to, rip the weather off and bring it down to Tom McCarthy, who was doing the afternoons at GY.
Yeah.
And And Tom Parker was over at WGFM.
Sure. Yep.
John Sidorsky or John Daniels, there.
Yep.
And Bob Cudmore would take over the Contact show.
There you go.
That's where I got to meet him first.
Sure.
So some of those names were really, and I wasn't really a starstruck person, but it was a fun time.
Yeah. You're talking some terrific work with Peter Reif for a very short time when he was at WGY.
Good person, fun person, but also what a voice.
Oh, yeah.
And he was backed up by another person with a good voice who's also gone. I'm trying to get up to Jim Gagliardi.
Are you trying to catch up to Jim's total for dead people? It ain't going to work.
Fortunately, we lose people, and some at very young age. Jeff Gluck.
Remember
that name.
Yeah, I do.
So they were very kind to me. They taught me a lot. And
nice.
It was, I would write the news, but it was Mark Karros who really got me started with that. So that was an important part. And then right after my junior year, Mark Karros had moved to Saratoga Springs to work for Kent Jones.
WKAJ.
There you go. He was a general manager there. And so I've been working at this fruit company for 6 years. I finally, I gave Mark a call, and he was thrilled that I was interested in maybe doing something for him. Mm-hmm. And it was funny. He comes over to me, or I go over to him over on West Avenue. That's the building, Yep. But that wasn't the building I was in for, afterward, but the original building. And, he wanted me to write some news stories, and then he wanted me to read them, and I was able to read them. And he goes, John, I knew you could write because he and Peter Reif taught me how to write.
Sure.
But I didn't know you could read the news that well. So he gave me a job for that summer. He had left, and for the Christmas time after, my senior year, I also worked for them because it was right down the street. So had some history there. And of course, I got to know Kent Jones.
There you go.
Usually I was just doing some news during the day, and we were also engineering. Or when I say engineering, we're taping reports from the Saratoga race course because we aired the races a half-hour delay.
Yep.
These days, you don't need all that. But
right.
And I was the one who put it all together.
There you go.
That would lead to one of my favorite things that I ever did a little bit later on. But I got to know Kent and, a lot of the people there. Graduated from Ithaca. I applied for a job right away in Binghamton as a TV director because that was my
what you
first
wanted to
love.
do, yeah.
So I went up a very large hill to their UHF station, WMGC, where a graduate from 2 years before that had actually recommended me to be a director for the weekend news and sports things. And I was ready.
Great place to start, yeah.
Yep. And they offered me the job. But they were going to pay me $170 a week. And even that time, that was low, low
especially for TV.
And going to a new place. But for TV, I mean, as I said, it's a UHF station,
True. True.
In the winter, I don't know if you can get up there. So
that
kind of thing. So I thought about it, but wasn't, too keen on it. I actually took a trip to Cape Cod for the first time with my brother. He had to get away from his girlfriend, just some time off. He eventually married her, by the way. So we just took a trip out there. And when I got back, I had a message from Kent Jones. And and he said he wanted me to work there full time.
Wow.
Just because of my work doing there, before. And it was the same amount, $170 a week, but I could live at home. That was the big thing for that.
Yep.
When it comes to covering Saratoga County, the other papers are offsides. Blow the whistle on those who think bigger newspapers provide sports fans with all the local information everyone needs.
The other paper is bigger, so it must have more local information.
Strike one.
The other paper covers a larger area, and we're part of that.
Strike two.
Saratoga County is number one on other papers' priority list.
And strike three. If you're looking for sports news about your neighbors, your local heroes, the Saratogian has more. 86% more than the Gazette, 84% more than the Record, 87% more than the Times-Union, and 93% more than the Post-Star. The Saratogian covers more local sports than the other four combined, to be exact. When it comes to local sports, the Saratogian scores a touchdown. The others land in the penalty box. When it comes to covering Saratoga County, the Saratogian should be measured, not weighed.
And of course, I think you had mentioned this. I didn't know it was a regular practice, but, I use my real name. John Meaney is my real name.
Okay.
But I had to use my real name because I also was the son of Jim and Marcia Meaney, who were very socially active in Saratoga Springs. So
there you go.
Why is he using a different name? So that's the name I've used, with the exception of at one point I was Big John Meaney doing an overnight show. So that's how I carried about. And then I got to work for the the 900 signal and the 102.3 signal.
There you go.
In Saratoga Springs.
Students who participated in the summer art program at the Junior College of Albany will display their artwork in the Best of Summer Art Show. That'll be on Thursday, July 31st from 5 to 7 p.m. in the gymnasium on the college's Albany campus at 140 East Scotland Avenue in Albany. The exhibit will be followed by a reception. Both are free and open to the public. If you'd like more information, call this number 270-2246. That number again, 270-2246. A message in the community interest from AM 90 WKAJ. The Saratoga Capital Region weather forecast is calling for thunderstorms and rain for the rest of tonight. Currently, the barometer is at 29.93 and rising slightly. The winds are calm, and the current temperature is 70 degrees. That's 70 degrees under cloudy skies in Saratoga Springs. It's 24 past 5. Coming up, your chance to win Yankee tickets. Stay tuned. Here's the music from Jackson Browne, In the Shape of a Heart, on AM 90 WKAJ, the sound of Saratoga.
By the time I graduated, they were in their new building. We actually called it the Newman E. Pete Waite Building. He was the president of the Adirondack Trust.
I remember the name. Yep.
And beautiful building. It was made for radio.
And where was that?
It was also on West Avenue.
Okay.
That's where the earlier studios
Sure.
But it was a facility. It's now the place where my urologist is and my pulmonologist, so
that's wild.
So I love going in there. As a matter of, during the early days of my marriage, about 25 years ago, her doctor was in there.
I'll be darned.
And she was in the old production studio, and the wallpaper was still the same.
Oh my God.
So, but I worked for that group I worked for that station for 7 years, till 1992, from 85 to 92, but under 3 different owners. Okay. The second owner was a combination of guys from Vermont. They came from St. Albans, Vermont, John and David Kimmel, as well as Howard Ginsburg. They didn't really stay in the market, so a lot of people don't know their names. Yeah. But what they did bring is they brought a young whippersnapper named Ken Benson, who is still programming stations around the country. I dare say around the world.
Wow.
Because the current person I work for, who's from Great Britain, says at the radio station he worked at somewhere in England, they have a picture of Ken Benson up on the wall.
Oh, be darned. Oh.
But he introduced us, first of all, to CDs. Yes, I started with the records and the carts before then.
Right.
And he turned it over where the 900 was the big thing, the AM when I worked there, to make the FM now more.
Sure.
So I worked for WQQY, 102 WQ.
Boy, they were running out of call letters, obviously, when they named that one.
Well, they found a way.
Why?
He came from Howard Ginsburg came from Triple X up
in
Burlington, Vermont. So yeah, QQY didn't. But, we had fun, and it was hit radio station, more than a hot AC, and, fast pace.
You know what I loved? I just had so many calls for birthdays, and I love wishing people happy birthday.
Great.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to do that right now. Somewhere in here is my list. Yesterday, I should say yesterday, I got a late call for somebody who was celebrating a birthday yesterday. And I did not wish this person a happy birthday, and I'd like to do that now.
Okay.
Even though the birthday was yesterday.
All right.
Happy birthday to Reagan Lovell, who was 11 yesterday from Saratoga Springs. Happy birthday, Reagan. So there you are.
Hope she had a nice day.
I hope so, too. You ready for the horoscopes? Huh? Okay, well, I'll go away from the mic. Okay, sure, there. Gemini, great success is possible in sales.
And, I worked with some people that really... The only person that came in at one point that has a name in the area is Ken McGrail.
Okay.
He did the morning show for the FM for a while. I did a lot with the AM, which was now standards, big band, stuff like that.
Right.
And that was my first stint with a guy named Chris Martin.
There you go. Yeah.
And I would work later with him. We were connected at the hip for a lot of years. So I'd love to go into all the but you can't. You don't have enough time, nor does anybody have enough.
The nice part about podcasts compared to radio and TV is there's no time limit. Okay? Some of these podcasts I've done are 45 minutes to an hour. Others have turned into an hour and a half, and the nice part about it is wherever the conversation takes us, it takes us.
I'll let you do
and I can always edit out the bad stuff later.
As the producer. So, and then the third group that would own it was a local salesperson who a lot of people do know. His name was Bob Putnam. Mm-hmm. And he bought the station from the Kimmels and Mr. Ginsburg. And we kept sort of similar formats. And then in 1992, things were falling apart. They weren't doing as well. So they reduced my pay by $50 a week. And that was not a blaming thing, but I took it as an opportunity.
Sure.
And I said, you know what? First of all, remember, I didn't have the bug, originally.
Sure. Yeah.
It followed me, but I decided, why don't I pick this time to leave and figure out what I want to do next?
Good.
Allowing me to do that, I went on unemployment.
Okay.
So I went on unemployment for a year.
Wow.
I did, help some owners out, including the people that would take over for Bob Putnam. What happened was the FM station went from a hot adult contemporary to Z-Rock.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that format?
I don't remember.
It was a syndicated, and it was hard rock.
Okay.
And we had some fun with it and everything. And they moved the FM studio-wise to the show studios in Schenectady.
Okay. I wondered because my old college buddy, Barry Sims, came into town when the stations went into receivership, and he just recently mentioned there were 3 stations involved there, and I only remembered the 2, show stations. And so now you're telling me one of those was
and this is 102.3, which of course is still around, but it was that move that caused WAS and then WQQY to change from a Saratoga Springs station to a Ballston Spa station.
I gotcha.
Because they moved the sticks to the Waite Road and Clifton Park Tower. Okay. So and that's where it stands today, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So since they were moving the studios, and all they did was basically run a tape that the satellite would activate, it really wasn't much to it. But I picked that time to say this was, enough for me, at least for the time being.
Sure.
So I did some odds and end things, look for work under unemployment and stuff like that. And then things found me. The next thing I would do is the person that eventually bought the station, the 900 AM station, was a guy named Bud Walker out of Highland, New York, which is down near Poughkeepsie and New Paltz. And so I helped him with, getting things going. And he actually moved the studio, including the LPB board that we used, under the tower, which is right next to the high school on West Avenue, near where the old studios
exactly where KAJ used to be. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So and that association got me something a little later on, but it was actually Jay Scott up in Glens Falls, who has done magic
down here in Albany. Yeah, he worked for them for quite a while. Yeah,
this is twice that he gave me a call, and I actually did not know him, but apparently somebody had referred him, and I went up to Glens Falls to work for WENU.
Okay.
And work for Jay doing the afternoon show, and got to meet a few more people up in the Glens Falls area. It's wonderful, meeting different people. And some of them being reacquainted with. Yeah. But I worked up there for a little bit and doing some shows here and there, and had some interesting things go on, interesting automation for their AM with WSTL. They would have 7 carts in sequential order.
Okay.
They just play them, 7 carts, one after the other.
Yeah.
And your job was to fill the cart machines with new material. So it'd be like one cart would be a song, a liner, a song, a commercial,
Well, but once they queued back up, you had to yank them out and put new stuff in the correct order. Wow.
I've worked with a few automation systems, but that was definitely the crudest.
Yeah.
And there was a little light in the FM studio while you're on the air that tells you, oh, you're on the 7th cart. Better go change your carts.
Yeah.
Or we'll hear that song again.
Crazy.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, Because originally at the back at the WKAJ and WASM and stuff, I worked with a BE Control 16 operation. That's one where the big reels and you have the cart carousels and everything. And I learned to program that very well. So I got to, learn some technical sides as well. And all during that, I did lots of other things. I did sports. I did news. Peter had taught me a lot about news. So, people like the way I do the news, but I like just doing a little bit of everything.
Good.
So that's what I did. At the same time, Bud Walker also had a station. Remember, he's the one who took over 900 with a station in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And it was a country station and asked me to work there.
Okay.
So for 1 month, just 1 month, it was like December 1st to January 1st, I did the morning show. And the only reason why I left that was Jay Scott and the Don Heckman group up in Glens Falls finally gave me a full-time job doing that afternoon show on a regular basis.
There you go.
Plus sales.
Yeah.
And this was about 1993, 1994.
Gotcha.
From there, I got a call from Ken McGrail again.
Okay.
In 1994, it was the spring of 1994. Say they're starting a new station in Saratoga Springs. It's actually the 101.3 signal, the WSSV, which I did not work for. And they have a new owner, Peter Coughlin, out of Rochester. And they're going to call it 101.3 The Jockey.
There you go.
This is the first installment of The Jockey. So we were up on the hill in Stillwater.
Oh, wow.
Where there's an old Air Force site, and we were in a house right next door, and we would broadcast from there. Beautiful. We had nice boards and everything like that. And I'd do the afternoon show. Okay. And I was going to bring up a name, and I'm not sure if you can remember her name, but Ken McGrail and a guy named E.J. Bombard, who is a good friend of Tom Hahn.
Oh, I remember that. Tom. I worked with Tom at the new school. Yeah.
He was doing the news. Ken McGrail was doing the morning. And I'm thinking it's Beverly something. Do you remember their beautiful voice?
Oh, boy.
Just a marvelous voice.
Yeah.
I won't come up with it, and I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, but now you got my brain going because I do remember a Beverly, and now I'm trying to remember who it was.
And she would do the middays, I would do the afternoons, and then we'd close up shop and let automation run overnight. We moved that operation down to Malta, where a lot of people ended up through that ownership and everything, and worked for Peter Coughlin for a little while. We brought in some other people, including a guy named Mike Flynn. Our own Jim Steele in the business. Yeah. And that's where I met Mike, and we became good. We actually did, I think, shows together on 3 different stints.
Isn't that crazy?
Including Star 101.3. So that's where I was. And then at one time I just said, this is enough. Peter wanted me to do more sales, and I did have an issue. And that was I smoked for years and had some lung problems. And you'd hear me coughing on the air.
Boy.
At least he wanted me to tape everything. I said, you know what? That's enough. So I left him, and this was in 1996.
Okay.
And that next month, I was getting married.
Oh, geez.
I'm one who was actually unemployed the day he was married.
Oh, no.
But I had a job lined up, and that was working with Bud Walker again.
Yeah.
And that was in 1996, working at the 900 signal again. But this time we were going to do big bands and standards. And the actual studio was at the bottom of the tower on West Avenue, literally in the doghouse. No bathroom there, by the way.
Oh, no.
So I was from 6 to about 8 o'clock every morning. If I had to go to the bathroom, just don't go near the tower. But after 8 o'clock, I could go into the Spectrum or the cable company and use their bathroom. Right. So it was like that. And when there was a thunderstorm coming, I'd actually put the automation on. I'd go out to the parking lot, sit in my car as I watched the guide wires line.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
So anyway.
That's craziness. Well, before we started recording here, you mentioned to me that you were going to give John Gabriel a run for his money on call letters. And we're not even anywhere near the end of your story, and I'm already, they're adding up. You and I are going to be here after this is done,
we're going to
coming up with a list. And you may have to stay the night.
And I will miss some, but those were WBUG and WBGG.
Okay.
And then we went back to, did we go back to WKAJ? By the way, WKAJ, we know where those call letters came from.
Right. Kimberly Ann Jones, the daughter.
And she was in my high school class.
I'll be darned.
I'm still in touch with her. And,
I'll be darned.
As a matter of fact, I might reach out to her.
Yeah.
Just say that.
See, when I worked with Kent, for Kent in the early 70s, she was, she was not even a teenager yet, I don't think. No, she was quite young. Yeah.
Later, she had one stint. It was a short stint, but where she actually became general manager of the station.
I'll be darned.
So she became my boss.
Well, her mom was the sales manager at KAJ when I was there. She was working. Yeah.
Fran Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the sad thing. Kim was supposed to get married Saturday, and Fran had passed the Sunday before. And one of the saddest things is the flowers at the wake were the wedding thing. So it was just one of those awful things.
Yeah, that's terrible. That's too bad.
But there's some great memories there. So you're right. There's been a lot of call letters and all. The big thing happened while I was working for Bud Walker for about 2 years. So it was 1998. It got a call from Jay Scott again.
Okay.
And he said he wants me to work for this guy named Ernie Anastas.
I know that name as well. Yeah.
I'm going, who's that?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Yeah. So I didn't know who that was.
Yeah.
So we met up at the Queensberry Hotel and with this Ernie Anastas, and we were ready to go on board with a new thing. They had taken over the 101.3 signal. I knew the building like the back of my hand because I'd already been there.
Yeah.
And Jay, I'm going, Jay wants me to be his afternoon guy or wants me to. No, he picked me out to be the morning show guy.
Wow.
And I think Jay is one of the guys that I've worked with that does very well with prep work and putting things together. Mm-hmm. But no, I became the morning man at Star 101.3. By the way, I will say that I came up with that.
Oh, there you go.
Ernie and I were talking afterwards at Pinnell's, and I said, how about Star 101.3? He goes, I like
it. Yeah, so, cool.
Ernie was an innovator. He was great. For those who don't know, he's a long time anchor, the news anchor mostly, down in New York City. Yep. He's worked for many, but he also worked with ABC. He's been a host of Good Morning America at times and well respected. And there are some stories I had during there. There's one time that I'll never forget. It was not a great time. Is we were going to have a party up at Saratoga Lake, the whole crew, and everybody's going to, join each other. And
nice.
And I brought my young son, who was only about 3 years old at the time, and Ernie was coming up to join us, but he had to take a right at the Berkshire Spur coming up the thruway from New York City. JFK Jr.'s plane.
Oh, wow.
So
yes. Oh, wow. That weekend. Yeah.
So that was one of the stories, but he also taught me a whole lot. He's a wonderful man. He still does some things. I think he does a podcast or something along those lines, Positively Ernie. So he was a great person to be around.
Nice.
I'm glad I worked with him. He brought in a young guy, Scott Collins.
Okay.
Who a lot of people knew because he was the son of Gene Collins, who used to run Channel 10.
Okay, I knew that name. Sure, yeah.
Those connections would make for my favorite time in radio, and that is Scott was able to bring in a lot of people to our little radio station in Malta just to give it some oomph at times. Mm-hmm. But during that time, I got the chance to work with, even manage.
Okay.
I'll never forget when Bob Cudmore called me his boss during a presentation once that I never thought I would meet. Many people very much involved. Walt Adams,
sure.
Rick Mitchell.
Sure.
We did the show together. He taught me one of the biggest things in my radio life, and that's how to prep.
No.
And he was wonderful to work with. I worked with many different partners. But on the AM side, we had the Star on the FM side. On the AM side, we had Moon Radio.
Okay.
And mostly Scott brought in some legends.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Fitz.
Yeah.
Okay. Bob Cudmore, as we've mentioned. I know I'm going to forget some. But one of those, of course, became one of my best friends, and that's Dick Wood.
Oh, yeah.
It was through Scott that he brought Dick Wood to do This Day in History. And Dick and I became such good friends, especially after he began a project called Jazz Tracks. And we did a jazz show every week. I would run the board. Here I was, the operations manager there and the morning show guy, but this was my favorite hour and a half every week.
Wow.
And Dick and I just, such a rapport and so many stories of personal note that, I miss him.
Oh.
And I actually had open heart surgery on his 90th birthday.
Oh, wow.
He's calling me every day at the hospital. I can't talk yet.
Yeah.
And then my open heart surgery, by the way, was a valve replacement.
Gotcha.
So it was sort of like, it wasn't something that happened, other than that.
And Dick's 90th was covered by Channel 10 and some other stations in town because it was, he was just a legend here in the area, spent most of his career here. And
things about Dick is, I called him a very good friend. And all, but I think a lot of people could call him a very good friend. He made everybody feel good. No
absolutely. Yep.
I'd go to lunch with him, and here I am, just this, guy who's people would recognize him.
Oh, sure.
Say, you're Dick Wood, and all that. And he said, do you know John Meaney? And I thought, what a just a way. Yeah. I miss him. He died a year later. Just about on his 91st birthday. Yeah. And I could not even be at services because I developed COVID.
Oh boy!
But I have many, many memories, and I will talk about him forever. And
he was part of our Louis Lunch bunch that we talk about on this podcast a lot. And I got the opportunity occasionally to pick him up at home and bring him to the lunch when his wife would be working and doing her art. And he just so genuine. And you could always count, when we knew Dick was going to be at the lunch, you could always count on full tables. Yeah. Everybody wanted to be there. They knew that they would hear a story or two that they'd heard 3 times before, but he'd always come up with a new one as well. And he was such a storyteller.
Or at least a new take.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And he was just such a storyteller and had so many that he could share. And with his booming voice, especially in his later years, his hearing wasn't terrific, so the whole restaurant would enjoy the stories.
And the younger folks might remember him as doing the quick response commercials.
Exactly.
And, I don't know if you know the story of how that happened.
I don't know if we've talked about that on the podcast here.
He lived in Latham, and one day he drove his car, and he drove through the back of his garage into his family room.
Yeah. Oh, God.
And one of our connections in Saratoga said, you ought to call quick response. And Vince DiLorenzo and Dick became instant friends. So he, for years,
wound up doing the commercials
of quick response, and just a beautiful man.
Great.
I'll tell you one story about him only because, it as a personal note, he also had heart bypass surgery, which, some of our friends have had and everything. And it takes a while to recover. But when he was recovered, my wife and I were actually the first people invited to his house to have dinner. What an honor. I mean, he knows so many people. Yeah. But the funny thing is, I don't know if you ever met his wife. You've probably met
briefly, yes.
Yep. She's got a wit all her own. Yep. Well, we're having dinner. My wife and I are opposite each other, and Dick and his wife are opposite each other. Nice little candles on the thing. And I think I said, those are beautiful candles. He says, Chris goes, yeah, but just you watch. Dick's will be shorter than mine by the end of the dinner conversation because he keeps yapping and yapping and yapping and blowing on it. So it was anyway, so I got to meet a lot of great people, and some of them I love, and many of them, some of them are gone, with Steve Fitz. It was just a wonderful relationship. And I know there are more, but I can't. Oh, here's one thing I will say,
okay.
People will, I was the last program director for Boom Boom Brannigan.
Well, seriously? Okay. I do remember him. Tell us.
We had our third signal there, which we actually for a while called the Sun. Okay. And it's the 1240 signal, which a lot of our colleagues have worked at one time.
That's where I started. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, again, and so where the transmitter.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes it got underwater.
Yes, very much so. Yep.
Near the Rotterdam Mall.
Yep.
He would track a morning show.
Okay.
Or a station we had. We had a lot of people tracking, and he'd record like 1,500 liners. And then you'd rotate him, and you seemed like he was going live.
Sure.
A little story about that. He came into our studio one day, brought us donuts. So we talked for a little bit. Rick Mitchell and I were doing the FM, and he was doing his thing. And it was just, I don't think a month later that he had a stroke.
Wow.
His family called us up and said, could you keep it running? So while he was no longer capable of being So we kept his liners going, but it was under their request for those years. And it wasn't until he passed that we finally had to take it off the air because everybody would know. But what a legend he was. And I was so glad to at least be able to, work with him a little bit and meet him later in his life.
Yeah, probably the most mentioned name on this podcast of all that I've done, because all of us seemed to not only listen to him growing up, but determined this is what I'm going to do. I want to be like this guy.
Isn't that?
And and I mean, what a tribute to him that there are still, people on the air to this day in this market that, attribute their early love of radio and, DJing to this ultimate DJ.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy just, once again, he just lived it, breathed it.
He did.
If he wasn't on the air, he was doing a record hop somewhere,
his appearances were just as big as what he did.
Absolutely.
Because of how he came to that event.
Yes.
I mean, he was
he was a show.
He was a showman. He really was.
Yeah,
and so that was terrific.
Yeah.
So Ernie Anastas eventually sold those stations to Joe Riley.
Okay.
Of the New York State Broadcasters.
Yes.
He had a partner, Nirav Patel, and he also went in, I believe, with Joe Tardy Jr.
Oh, I know that name. Yep.
And I forgot his name, but the man who owns Hippos, or at the time did. And so they came in, and I had a year left because apparently there was a deal made, and Ernie, said as part of the sale, you need to keep everybody for 1 year. And 1 year later, Joe Riley called me into the office and said, you know what? I need your services anymore.
I'll be darned.
So I said, let's try something else. And eventually I would end up doing procurement for Empire State College in Saratoga Springs. And that's what I'm doing to this day.
Interesting.
However, back in 2019, I was called to, come back at a news station that I'm actually continue to be on.
Okay.
And it's, we call it Saratoga Star Radio. It's at starsaratoga.com. It's not a strong signal, but we're using the old AM 1160 signal and 93.3 in Saratoga Springs, but it's mostly if you get it on your phone or your, through the app, then the best way.
Yeah.
I was doing the morning show for like 4 years and then going to work at Empire State College.
Oh, boy.
And it was like, it got to be a lot. So this past February 29th, I gave my notice and said, I just can't do it anymore. But now I do a daily community calendar and I do a weekend show. So I'm still in there.
Gosh,
into an industry that I never
that you didn't really
wanted to get into.
You wanted to do. Exactly. Isn't that something?
So I wanted to give you one more thing that happened. Just it's a bragging thing.
Okay.
As part of that stint back at Star 101.3 for Anastas Media, of course, they had Moon Radio, which consisted of the standards, big bands, and things like this, which by this time I knew pretty well. And we had our hot adult contemporary station of Star 101.3. I did both morning shows, and they're across the hall from each other. I would literally go back and forth.
Seriously?
Back and forth. And that's one of the reasons why they called it Moon Radio, because, some celestial body, I'll get it, right half the time.
Yeah.
And people fascinate when I tell them that I did.
Now, what year was this that you were doing that?
Well, that's
Can
a good
you remember
question.
what it was?
Before Rick came along.
Okay.
That's
absolutely crazy.
Dave Bingham was doing the afternoon. So it must have been maybe around 2001, 2000.
Okay. So, voice tracking was in by then. Why weren't you just tracking one and doing the other live?
I would do almost that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, both stations were being run by computers.
Okay. Yeah.
So I could, stop it when I wanted to. Because when I do the voice tracking,
that's true. That's true.
I might do. Every once in a while I'll voice track something.
Yeah.
A few liners just to say I can go another song or something. But I played around with all that stuff.
God.
And with all this being said, Warren, that's what I went through with being on the air with radio. A lot of other things. I did a lot of sports. I did play-by-play for, everything.
Sun going down. Now the lights will take over for Light here at Mike Bailey Field. A good kick by Bonanno. It hits the ground. Mattiazzo will take this one. Right ahead. Oh, and he's hit hard at the 20-yard line. Doesn't even get up to there. Ball's going to be at the 18-yard line. First and 10 for Saratoga. Three sack on offense. Two tight ends.
Wide to the right. Well, to the right-hand side goes Manny Avila, Rich Darling, and Mike Nesbitt in the backfield. Now Nesbitt goes in motion. They give to Darling on the pitch. Follows his line and gets up to the 20-yard line. So a gain of about 2. Good tackle made by George Ruth and Jason Skimmerhorn.
It was actually behind the scenes that I found most fascinating. I was always the operations manager because I understand some of the technology. No, I was not an engineer, anything by any means, as even some of our group in the lunch, are much better than I am. But I can handle things technically, and I did a lot of programming of some of those, the new things where we started out with playing the 45s and the carts, and we got into where there's nothing even on compact discs.
Exactly. It's all in the computer. It's mouse clicks, which is probably, and I think I've probably said this before, it's one of the reasons why I don't miss it as much as I thought I would. Because it really was, I was going in and in an hour on a Saturday morning doing my 6-hour Sunday shift.
It's not.
And I was having more fun when I was doing that in up to 2020. I was having more fun live on the air for 10 minutes with Joe Gallagher down the hall at WGY than I was on TRY. And there was a lot of show prep involved.
Yep.
I would sometimes spend more time in the show prep than it took me to actually record, to voice track the show.
Right.
And I said, what's wrong with this picture? Something was getting out of it. So when it happened, when I was one of, thousands let go in the same day by iHeart, I took it in stride. And within a few weeks, I said, I'm not missing it. But then again, within 2 years, I'm doing this because I do miss talking about it, talking with people about it. Yeah. So this is the greatest retirement gig I've ever had.
I've loved listening to these things because I'm hearing people, a lot of them that I knew or listened to, and even some that I didn't, it was hard to be really knowing what's going on in radio when you were doing it so much.
It's true. Yeah.
Most of the stations I listened to were my own to make sure they were running.
There you go.
So
there you go.
I missed out. And plus, I'm so young compared to that, I can only remember so far.
Sure. So, yeah.
I mean, I do remember getting up in the morning when I was in second grade, listening to Dick Shannon and Harry Downey and High Agent on WGY, with my dad and Dick Beach.
Listening so I can for name the schools to be closed. Yeah.
That reminded me when we started at WKAJ for Kent Jones, I was fascinated that one of the things I had to do was to read the lunch menus for the day. You
were still doing that?
You're still doing that.
I did that. And in fact, if you listen to Bob Carroll's podcast a couple of months ago, I was doing that with him at KHA in 1972, 73.
It's just fun that you can say that. I know it's corny and tacky, but...
Yeah, but small town radio is its own little thing. Okay, we used to do at KHA. There were a lot of public affairs back in the day, back before the rules changed. You had to have a certain amount of news and public affairs. So every Saturday morning there was an hour, a live hour on KHA where we interviewed local folks, usually in politics, sometimes in business. You know who got the most phone calls without fail every time they were on? The local dog catcher.
Real
animal control people in Saratoga. The phones would go nuts. People had questions up the yin-yang, but you could have the mayor on and the phones would sit there and nothing would happen. I mean, it just, craziness, but that's what small town radio was and still is in some areas because, the big corporations haven't got them all yet.
Yeah.
And so some of the smaller stations and the smaller markets are still very much live. And they're serving their community, super serving their community.
They're the ones that I like listening to.
Yeah.
Because I do like that type of radio.
Yeah.
It's not going to draw the large crowd.
No, it's not.
There's just something to it.
Yeah.
When I was doing the morning show for 102WQ, but I think it was for the AM station, on a regular basis, we'd have the Farm Report. It would only be like 10 minutes, but Joe Peck, who lives in the town of Saratoga, is still around.
Now, Joe was doing it in 1972 when I was there.
He still bring them, when I was.
He brought them in on cassette.
Yep.
And it was the most god-awful audio you ever wanted to hear. He was in his kitchen, and it sounded like he was in the sink doing it.
Yep.
You know, and it was like 5 minutes at 6:25 every morning. And he was still doing it when you were there.
Yeah, he was.
And you say he's still around.
Yes, he and his wife are,
I'll be darned.
Still, they're not farming as much anymore.
Sure,
and stuff
sure.
Like that. And he
I'll
became
be darned.
actually big into Toastmasters. And we like to say WKAJ got him.
There you go. Absolutely. You know? Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot to that. You never know who you're going to meet or what you're going to do through this stint. And that's what's been so great about the podcast is we all have those little stories that, are just like especially fascinating to us, but we hope people find that, wow, you did that. You know, so.
I mean, and the crazy thing is, and I don't know, maybe there are people that are serving somewhere else in the world, but according to my statistics from my podbean.com, the people that host me, they tell me where people are listening. And mostly, obviously, it's the U.S. and, Canada thrown in now and again. But I'm finding that we've got listeners over in Europe all the time.
That's great.
So again, it must be, I would think somebody either transplanted from here that's living there. Who knows? Could be, John Gabriel's great-grandfather somewhere. I don't know, but they are listening around the world to these things. Either that or they just have a morbid curiosity about what American radio was and now is.
One of the things that I wish we could convey, I've got two kids, they're 25 and 20 now, but, they don't understand. But I don't, the problem is the kids these days will never know the feeling of hearing your school called for a snow day.
That's true.
By Don Weeks.
That's true.
It may be. Yeah. And you don't have that anymore. It's scrolling or they get a text and say you're off.
And how about the days when the local stations had jingles of the school, of the school's name, the Spartans of Burnt Hills. And you would just be thrilled to hear that on there because you went to, Burnt Hills High, So. And there was another place I was going with that. Oh, okay. So this is, again, with the sadness of things. I'm working part-time at the Albany International Airport at the information booth. Okay. Kind of gets me out of the house. My wife loves that, a couple times a week. And there's we're now relocated right next door to Dunkin' Donuts. So there's this young lady just out of Oswego State. She just graduated. And when we got to talking about what I did with my life, I said, well, for most of it, I was a DJ on the radio. She said, what's a DJ on the radio? And I just about lost the donut I was eating at the time. Yeah, it very, very scary that, that she didn't understand that terminology at the age of 22.
We're going to be in history books.
Yeah.
The only place you're going to be able to find us.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Save your pictures.
Yep. I've tried to keep most of these podcasts G-rated or PG-rated because I do want my granddaughter, who's now 14, I do want her to listen someday and say, oh, that's what Papa did, and then, that's why he has those microphones up in the den, And so I'm hoping it'll get there. But yeah, I'm just trying to record the history of Capital Region, broadcasting as much as we can. And you just brought up a guy that has to sit where you're sitting, or at least I'll try to get him, on the phone. Joe Riley absolutely has to be in on this.
He's been through so much.
He has.
Knowing what's going
on all around. Yeah. And I don't know Joe well. We've met a couple of times, but I'm going to get in touch. And he'll be hopefully a future guest.
I think he would. He loves talking
about the business.
I wish we had the opportunity to had parted in a different way. We still wish each other a happy birthday on Facebook or something
that's
like
nice.
that. So that's really good.
Yeah, no. One of the good guys in broadcasting who goes to bat for broadcasters.
Yes, he has. Yeah, for years.
Yeah.
It's been great. So.
Wow, what a story, John! I had no idea you had all that in your background. That's.
I got more, but you don't want to hear about. We don't want part two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But as I said earlier, now we're going to sit here. We're going to try to write down. I hope I have enough ink in the pen.
Right.
Write down as many call letters as we can come up with here. And the nice part about it is nobody's going to fact check, so don't worry about it. If you want to make a couple up, I mean, QQY sounds made up to me.
Yeah, doesn't it?
But thank you so much for coming in and sharing this with us.
It's been fun reminiscing more than anything.
Yeah.
it just brings out, and there's a part of me that says, did I really do that? Was that really part of my life? You get that a lot more, and it's nice to recall this to say, yeah, I did it. You know?
Well, I said to my wife just last week, I said, I don't know who was the dummy that hired me to be a news director in when I'm 22 years old.
Yep.
I mean, it just, to me, made no sense whatsoever looking back at it now, but it happened.
I wanted to tell you one more thing, and that is I did get the chance to direct TV.
Good.
Point. So I just wanted to let you know that
excellent.
That other dream didn't go by the wayside.
Okay.
I actually did a lot of local basketball games for a guy named Tony Izzo out of Boston Spy, who put it on the cable cast, and I was his director.
Excellent.
With the multi-camera thing. And however, I never told you about my forte. And that is public address announcing.
Oh, yes.
So for years I've been doing that. So while I didn't have the radio bug when I was young, and I still, I enjoy it, but some people are really fascinated with it. Public address announcing is a different thing.
Yeah. Well, I've done very little of it. The football games, my senior year, I was the voice from the booth over the Burn Hill Spartans, football field, where Dan DiNicola sat next to me. He was my English teacher in high school and speech teacher, and he thought I would enjoy this. He knew that I was already on the radio part-time. It's still when I was in high school. So my senior year, I sat next to him, and all I remember is the first time I did. And I'm basically, it wasn't play by play. It was just announcing, who just carried the ball and where we are now the first touchdown my team gets, all my teammates and classmates are out on the field, I'm jumping up and down in the booth, and he grabs my arm, pulls me back into the seat, and he said, you're either going to announce this game up here sitting down, or you can go down and sit with your friends down there. Right. But this is your job now. You cannot be cheering your team on. Dan DiNicola told me that. Yeah.
Good.
So
I had a good mentor too, Greg Petray, who would be later be the announcer for the Adirondack Red Wings.
Oh, there you go.
Civic Center.
Yep.
And I've been doing for I'll be entering my 39th season as the basketball announcer for the Skidmore College Thoroughbreds.
Terrific.
I'm in the Skidmore College Sports Hall of Fame. If you were to see my physique, you go, what?
Good for you, John.
So
That's
that
terrific.
has been my enjoy. And I had one time where I did a special football game in Saratoga Springs. I actually did a series of them. Bill Parcells was up in the booth.
Wow.
And I'm announcing the game, and I announced a lot like Bob Shepard of the Yankees and the Giants. And of course, he was with the Giants, and he goes, boy, we got another Bob Shepard on our.
Nice.
I have that on my resume.
Oh, there you go. I don't blame you. Now, here's the big question.
All right.
I once announced a wrestling match. Have you ever done that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I did a lot of wrestling in high school.
And wrestling, and that's what it was. The coach came to me and said, we've got this tournament going on. Can you be the announcer?
I think I've done every sport.
Well, there you go.
Including gymnastics, which is the hardest.
Yeah.
Because there's no crowd, cheering things.
It's
so
true.
If you mispronounce a name, everybody knows. Let me give you one more story. I announced the Albany Firebirds, the original.
Okay, cool.
At the Knickerbocker Arena.
Yeah.
There were 3 people that were asked to do it. One was the late Ed O'Brien.
Oh, wow.
And he did it first. Then Marcy Elliott was second.
Interesting.
I was the third one. I don't know where the connection came from.
Yeah.
But I did the game. They liked me so much that I did the 4th game. So I got 2 in their first season.
Very nice.
I really enjoy doing that. And
Yeah.
I did a playoff basketball game even this year. So we're, it's my love. The big thing is I wish my voice had stayed stronger. You listen to some of our colleagues, they still got it.
Okay. Okay. One more. Can you top this? And this goes back to my KAJ days.
Okay.
I did a remote broadcast, and we actually did play-by-play a parade going through Saratoga. And when they said, wait a minute, I said, what? I'm going to announce a parade on the radio. You're going. It's a 2-hour show for the whole parade. You're going to stand there. And I said, this is on the radio. You understand? It's like, so that one stuck with, well, they sold it. Somebody sold the broadcast. So
that's what happened.
You're going to do it, whether you like it or not.
I also had my favorite job, and that was in 1985 when I first began. I had told you I was an engineer as we broadcast the races from the Saratoga race course. The next year, I got to do it at the track.
Ooh.
And it was such a wonderful thing. You're there at the track, way up there in the judge's booth.
Yeah.
I had a switch that turned on Marshall Cassidy's mic.
Neat.
For the station.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would turn it on just to listen to what he was doing. We weren't broadcasting at the time.
Yeah.
And you'd hear him, call on the phone. Yes, I'd like a ham sandwich and a Coke, no ice. And I was like, okay, there's an announcer. But my famous story is where I was is if I were to take 2 big steps to the left, there would be no photo finish because I'd be blocking the cameras.
Interesting.
That's how good the
Wow,
was.
that's pretty good
so
seating.
Some of the things you come by, some of the people you meet in this industry has been a lot of fun. And I have not paid for a concert ticket since.
Oh, wasn't it nice? Yeah, I remember those days. And it's back. I used to be able to park in the press lot so that you didn't have to leave with everybody else and take 2 hours getting home. Exactly. Yeah, no, I remember those days very well. Yeah. Very well.
Very nice.
Well, once again, John, this is terrific. Thank you for sharing with us, and you're welcome back at any time if you think of more stories you want to tell.
Well, I'll do them at the lunch table, and we'll see if they'll bore the audience.
Yeah, see if we keep people out of their plates. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay. Take care, sir. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Warren Freon.
Radio Split Ranch.
For a guy who never set out to be a radio personality, I think you'd have to agree John has done all right for himself and his many legions of fans over 40-plus years. Now, you'd think that by staying pretty much in one county for most of his radio career, John would have very few call letters to add to our running total on our podcast. But as you heard, between ownership changes and call letter changes, he's racked up a considerable list. In fact, I believe he now leads all our interviewees on total call letters he's spoken on the air, 18. So that's going to pump up our running total to 333 stations by the 33 folks that you've heard so far on the Radio Split Ranch. So, as you check the list of veteran broadcasters I've had the pleasure to sit down with over the last 3 years or so, have you noticed anyone missing? Have you got a favorite that we haven't been able to corral yet? Maybe it's someone who came through the market and moved on, or that you worked with along the way. Whatever. I'm always looking for suggestions. I still have my own personal list of about 20 people I hope to reach out to, but that doesn't mean your choice is on my list. So please reach out with your suggestions. Either make a comment on our Facebook page or at my host page at podbean.com, or drop me a note, wgarling@aol.com. On a personal note, this month marks 55 years since my first day on the radio, so I thought it might be fun to share with you an air check from 35 years ago when I marked my 20th anniversary with a special hour on the Great 98 WTRY. That was on June 24th, 1989. I remember asking my PD at the time, Walt Adams, if I could take an hour of my regular weekly Saturday morning show to mark the occasion. He said, sure, why not? So if you're up to it, give a listen. I won't bore you with the whole morning, just the anniversary hour, which opens with me talking to veteran WTRY newsman Lou Tinney. If this doesn't scare you away, maybe you'll even come back next month for some more time travel. In the meantime, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened.
WTRY for the Capital District.
Okay, Lou, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
All right.
Remember what you were doing 20 years ago today, the summer of 1969?
I most assuredly do remember what I was doing in the summer of 1969.
What were you doing?
I was working at WTRY.
Hey, how about that?
That's very funny. I worked here. I came to work for George Lizotte in the summer of 1969, and I know they were playing music from the rock festival down in
Woodstock. Yeah.
Woodstock.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Why? What more significant thing happened then?
Well, yours truly on this very date 20 years ago started in radio.
Oh, well.
How about that?
How about that?
The old WSNY.
Yeah, and now 20 years later, look how far both of us
yes.
Chris Warren, WTRY, the oldie station.
And I know what song was playing at midnight, June 24th, 1969, on WSNY, Schenectady. This song right here, Joe Jeffrey Group. First song I ever played on the radio, My Pledge of Love. The oldie station, 98 WTRY, taking time to remember 1969, summertime, when Joe Jeffrey was the first song I played on the radio, and this one was the second. After that, I don't remember a thing. I'm surprised I remember that. I was so nervous. Just got out of my junior year of high school, 16 years old, on the radio, and having a grand time. And 20 years later, I still enjoy this stuff. Here's Junior Walker and the All-Stars. What does it take to win your love? Jackie DeShannon on the oldie station, 98 WTRY 914, a Saturday morning, and we're reminiscing together. Summer of 1969, my first year in radio, commercial radio. I had a little radio station down in the basement, you know, and didn't every disc jockey on the radio, and had fun with that, but finally wrangled a job on local radio. As we mentioned earlier, it was the old WSNY 1240 on the AM dial. They're not there any longer. It's a different radio station. They do different things, and, you know, time does march on, except Lutany. Lutany still works here, you know? I mean, that's just the way that works sometimes. In any event, there were only a handful of number one songs that summer of 1969. This song next had been number one for about 5 weeks as I entered the radio biz. It was a big one for the Beatles. Get Back.
Get back home, Loretta. Get back, get back, get back to where you once belonged.
Give us a button. We're AM 980, 98 WTRY, the Capital District's oldies station. Beatles had just left the top spot with that song when they released another one, the Ballad of John and Yoko, from the summer of '69. Oldie station, 98 WTRY. And to show you how conservative things were back in 1969, I mean, you know, they were, yes, marching in the streets and a lot of crazy stuff was going on in the late 60s, but the radio station that I was working for at the time could not play that song as you just heard it. They really couldn't. The portion where it talks about Christ, they had to flip the word around and play it backwards so they could get it on the air. They didn't think the listeners at that time would take that song as it was actually produced. And so things were quite different back then. We had some other songs that were censored along the way, too, and maybe we'll get to those a little later on. 21 minutes after 9, 9:21, a Saturday morning, we're thinking back and remembering 1969 summertime, 20 years ago, when yours truly started in radio. We had some great music that year. Still got Three Dog Night coming up. Zager and Evans, you know what song that is, of course. The Archies, got to play that. It was number one for half this summer, and more, so stick around with us. We're going to check out Bob Kabachik's weekend weather forecast next.
Muddy, get it out, patch it up, and win.
The WTRY weather up to a very pleasant 71 degrees at WeatherWatch 98 WTRY. 20 years ago this week, the three-day Newport 1969 Rock Festival began on June 20th, wrapped up on the 23rd. That's why it was 3 days. The 150,000 persons there saw Jimi Hendrix, Joe Cocker, Ike and Tina Turner, Steppenwolf, Jethro Tull, the Rascals, the Byrds, Johnny Winter, and Booker T and the MGs, along with these guys right here. Creedence Clearwater Revival, and they were in the top 10 with Green River. And you got it on the oldie station, 98 WTRY. 98 WTRY, group that never had a number one song on the top 40. Hard to believe. The 25, 30 hits they had, none of them went to number one. Some of them got to number two. That's about as good as it got. And that was from the summer of '69, as we remember back 20 years ago this date. Here's Oliver from the biggest musical of the 1960s, called Hair. This is Good Morning Starshine. Lutany has news next at 9:30.
Fix you like Goodyear.
Well, since you've already done the weather, and since all you're going to do is just kind of sign off, let's talk about the summer of '69 news-wise. You remember, of course, a lot of the happenings of that summer. It was
that was the 69 was a big year.
Mm-hmm. We had, of course, the Vietnam War was still raging. Mm-hmm. Men dying in Vietnam. Woodstock, you mentioned last hour.
Right.
Okay, that was a biggie. Just right here in our own backyard, they closed the New York State Thruway.
Right.
And I believe that there were like 400,000 people there, of course, and great music that summer. That was, of course, in August. Year of the Amazing Mets.
Oh, right.
Won the World Series that year. And here's one for you, Lou. On Monday morning, July 21st, 1969, if you spent a dime for the New York Times, the front page headline was 4 words in the largest type they'd ever used. Men walk on moon, it said. And the record we chose to play at the radio station I was working at the time kind of expressed the feelings of those who lived through the turbulent 1960s, which were coming to a close. Everybody hoped it was going to be a little better in the 70s. The Young Bloods, Get Together. The oldie station, 98 WTRY, and a song that actually made the charts a couple of times. First time around didn't do very well, but then about 2 years after that, 1967, it was first released. In 1969, however, Brotherhood Week was declared in 1969 by the National Conference of Christians and Jews, and the group putting that together put that song, that actual record, in every public service announcement they sent out to all the radio stations to be read on the air about Brotherhood Week. And lo and behold, they picked it up, and the radio station started playing it again, and it got into the top 10 for the Young Bloods. folks get together. Also happening back in the summer of 1969, besides Woodstock and besides Newport, was another rock festival, this time in Toronto. Happened on June 22nd. 50,000 people were there. They saw Steppenwolf, the band, Procol Harum, and Chuck Berry, and these guys right here, David Clayton Thomas with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The oldie station, 98 WTRY. Blood, Sweat, and Tears from their first album with David Clayton Thomas. They had Child is Father to the Man or something like that before that, but that was when David Clayton Thomas joined them. And it was a hit in the summer of 69. That's what we're spotlighting this hour as we kind of remember my very first day on the radio. Actually, it was a night. It was at midnight on June 24th, 1969. And I went by the name of Jesse James at the time, worked at a radio station where everybody had names from young American days. All right, we had George Washington, we had Paul Revere, we had Tom Jefferson. This is no lie. I'm not kidding you. We were the Young Americans. For a while, they played fife and drum music behind us. Then I came on board, 16 years old. They gave me the name Jesse James. We did away with all the fife and drum music, and we just played good old rock and roll. We had a good time back then. And some of the stuff that was going on TV-wise back in the summer of 69, tell me if you remember this, on Saturday nights, starting at 7:30, by the way, okay? That's when primetime started back in 1969. On ABC, you could watch The Dating Game, followed by The Newlywed Game, then Lawrence Welk, a 1 and a 2, yes, and The Hollywood Palace on Saturday nights. Used to have some great acts on there. On CBS on Saturday nights, it was Jackie Gleason's show, My Three Sons, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, and Mannix at 10 o'clock. On NBC, back in 1969 summertime, you saw The Andy Williams Show, followed by Adam 12, and then Saturday Night at the Movies. Other hit shows on the air back in 1969, well, the Smothers Brothers were canceled that year after a couple of years with the show. The Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour slipped in their place. Hee Haw began, and it's still on in syndication. So am I now when you stop and think about it. Flying Nun, It Takes a Thief, The Brady Bunch, and my favorite back in the summer of 69, Jimmy Durante presents the Lennon Sisters Hour. Yes, it was on Friday nights on ABC. I kid you not, as somebody used to say on TV. But the show that I guess grabbed all the kids' attention back in 1969 or so was a Saturday morning cartoon show called The Archies. And they turned around and produced a #1 song. It was #1 the summer of 69, Sugar, Sugar. The original oldie station, 98 WTRY. I want to thank Walt Adams, our fearless leader here at 98 WTRY, for allowing me to have some fun this hour and remember 20 years ago when I first started in radio, and it's been a lot of fun since then, of course, but I enjoy the oldies and enjoy playing the stuff from back and, of course, in the 60s when I was growing up. And we have, that not only was Sugar Sugar at the top spot for like 5 or 6 weeks in the summer of 69, there's one other song that was #1 during that summer. We've got that one coming up next.
Thanks, Mom.
You're welcome. Oh, the WTRY Weather Watch 71 right now and sunshine at Weather Watch 98 WTRY.
The oldie station. Out of the past, WTRY. Solid gold.
The original oldie station, 98 WTRY. Say thanks for tripping down memory lane, as they say on the radio, with me this past hour. We had a lot of fun talking about the summer of 1969. This song right here, again, from Hair, was super popular in the summertime of 1969. We're going to leave you. Mike Edwards is coming up next, and we'll just start another 20 years on area radio. How's that sound? Good? All right, here's Fifth Dimension. We'll catch you next Saturday morning at 6 on the oldie station.